The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory as Josephine Taylor ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a war drum. The year was 1878, and what should have been a routine journey to Laramie had turned into a nightmare when outlaws ambushed the stagecoach. Blood seeped through her torn sleeve where a bullet had grazed her arm, but it was the terror of being stranded alone in this unforgiving wilderness that truly paralyzed her. "Stay down if you want to live, madam," a deep voice commanded from somewhere to her right. Josephine caught a glimpse of a tall figure crouched behind a boulder, revolver drawn, his face partially obscured by a weather-beaten Stetson. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the continuing gunfire. "Name's Alexander Blackett," he replied, firing off 2 shots that sent one of the bandits tumbling from his horse. "But introductions can wait until we're not being shot at." Josephine clutched her small handbag to her chest, feeling the outline of her father's pocket watch inside now the only possession she had left. The stagecoach driver and the other passengers lay motionless in the dirt. She was alone except for this mysterious cowboy who had appeared from nowhere. Another volley of shots rang out before an eerie silence fell across the plains. Alexander peered cautiously around the boulder. "They're retreating," he said, his voice calm despite the danger they'd just faced. "Must have decided we weren't worth the trouble." He holstered his gun and approached the wagon where Josephine huddled. Now that she could see him properly, she noticed his eyes the color of a summer sky, startling against his sun-darkened skin. His jaw was strong beneath several days' worth of stubble, and despite his rugged appearance, there was something gentle in the way he extended his hand to her. "Let me see that arm, miss." "Taylor, Josephine Taylor," she replied, wincing as she moved. "I was traveling to Laramie to take up a position as a schoolteacher." Alexander examined the wound with practiced hands. "Not too deep. You're lucky." He tore a strip from his own shirt and carefully bound her arm. "Laramie's still a good 3 days' ride from here, and these parts aren't safe for traveling alone." "What choice do I have?" Josephine gestured to the devastation around them, the dead horses, the broken stagecoach, the bodies of her fellow travelers. The reality of her situation crashed over her and tears welled in her eyes. "Oh God, they're all dead. Everyone's dead." Alexander's expression softened. "Not everyone. You survived, Miss Taylor." "And what good is that?" she cried, suddenly angry at the unfairness of it all. "I'm stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the clothes on my back." "You've got me," Alexander said simply, as if that settled everything. He stood and surveyed the horizon. "My cabin's about half a day's ride from here. We can shelter there, then I'll escort you to Laramie." Josephine stared at him in disbelief. "You expect me to go with a stranger to some remote cabin?" A flash of amusement crossed his face. "As opposed to staying here with the coyotes and vultures." "Yes, madam, that's exactly what I expect." His bluntness startled a laugh from her despite the dire circumstances. "You make a compelling argument, Mr. Blackett. Just Alexander, please, or Alex." He moved to check the stagecoach for survivors, confirming what they already knew. When he returned, his expression was grim. "We should bury them." They worked in silence, using pieces of the broken stagecoach to dig shallow graves. By the time they finished, the sun was high overhead, beating down mercilessly. "We need to move," Alexander said, glancing at the sky. "Storm's brewing and we don't want to be caught in it." He led her to where his horse was tethered, a magnificent chestnut stallion that snorted impatiently as they approached. "This is Thunder," Alexander said, patting the horse's neck. "He's not used to carrying double, but he'll manage." Josephine hesitated, suddenly shy at the thought of such close proximity to this man she barely knew. Alexander seemed to sense her discomfort. "I give you my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm in my company, Miss Taylor." "Just Josephine, please," she replied, echoing his earlier words. "Or Joe." He nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips as he helped her onto Thunder's back before swinging up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back was both unsettling and oddly comforting as they set off across the plains. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of thunder's hooves and the vast emptiness surrounding them making conversation seem unnecessary. Eventually, curiosity got the better of Josephine. "What were you doing out there, Alexander? In the middle of nowhere, just in time to save my life." She felt his chest move in what might have been a quiet laugh. "I wasn't exactly planning on playing hero today. I was tracking a mountain lion that's been going after my cattle. You're a rancher, on a small scale. 5 years ago, I came out here with nothing but thunder and a dream. Now I've got a cabin, a small herd, and enough land to keep me busy. And no one to share it with." Josephine asked before she could stop herself. There was a pause before he answered. "No, not anymore." Something in his tone told her not to press further, and they lapsed back into silence. The sky darkened as the promised storm gathered, and the first fat raindrops began to fall just as a small cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of pine trees. "Home, sweet home," Alexander announced as thunder carried them into the yard. The cabin was modest but sturdy, with a small corral for horses and a barn off to one side. Alexander dismounted first, then helped Josephine down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Let's get you inside before this rain gets worse," he said, leading Thunder toward the barn. "Make yourself at home." Josephine hurried to the cabin, pushing open the door to find a surprisingly cozy interior. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rough-hewn table and chairs occupying the center of the room. A bed was tucked into one corner, and shelves lined with books covered another wall. It was simple but clean and well kept. Alexander returned moments later, rain dripping from his hat and coat. "Sorry, it's not much," he said, shrugging off his wet garments. "It's wonderful," Josephine replied honestly. After the terror and exhaustion of the day, the cabin seemed like a palace. Alexander busied himself lighting a fire while Josephine explored the small space, running her fingers along the spines of his books with surprise philosophy, history, poetry. This cowboy was full of contradictions. "You're well-read for a rancher," she observed. He glanced up from the fire. "And you're remarkably calm for a woman who was nearly killed today." "I suspect the shock hasn't fully worn off yet," she admitted. "When it does, I'll probably fall apart completely." Alexander stood, dusting his hands on his trousers. "If you do, that's all right, you've earned it." Something about his quiet acceptance broke through the numbness that had sustained her. Tears welled in her eyes and she turned away, embarrassed. "I don't even know if my trunk survived," she said, her voice catching. "Everything I own was in that stagecoach." Alexander moved to stand beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. "We can ride back tomorrow if the weather clears, see what's salvageable. For now, let me find you something dry to wear." He rummaged through a chest and produced a shirt and trousers that would swallow her whole but were blessedly dry. "They'll be too big, but they'll keep you warm. I'll step outside while you change." True to his word, Alexander left her alone and Josephine changed quickly, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs to avoid tripping. When she called him back in, he had a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. "Hungry?" he asked, and only then did Josephine realize she was famished. "Starving," she admitted. He prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits, and they ate in companionable silence, the rain pattering against the roof. As the food and warmth revived her, Josephine felt her eyelids growing heavy. "Take the bed," Alexander said, noticing her exhaustion. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "You've been through hell today, Josephine. Let me offer you at least this small comfort." Too tired to argue further, she accepted his kindness, crawling into the bed that smelled of pine and leather and something uniquely Alexander. Sleep claimed her almost instantly. Sometime in the night, Josephine woke with a start, a scream trapped in her throat. The cabin was dark except for the dying embers of the fire, and for a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then the day's events came rushing back and a sob escaped her. "Josephine," Alexander's voice came from near the fireplace. "Are you all right?" "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't think I am." She heard him move, then felt the edge of the bed dip as he sat beside her. "The nightmares will fade with time," he said softly. "How do you know?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Because I've had my share." In the dim light, she could just make out his profile. "What happened to you, Alexander?" He stared into the dying fire. "I was married once. Her name was Emily. We came out west together full of dreams. She died in childbirth our second winter here. The baby, too." Josephine's heart constricted at the quiet pain in his voice. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "I'm so sorry." His fingers tightened around hers. "It was 3 years ago. Some days the pain is duller than others." They sat in silence, connected by their joined hands and shared grief, until Josephine felt sleep tugging at her again. As she drifted off, she was aware of Alexander gently tucking the blankets around her before returning to his place by the fire. The next few days settled into an unexpected rhythm. The storm lingered, making a return to the ambush site impossible. Alexander taught Josephine about ranch life, how to feed the cattle, care for thunder, and even shoot a revolver just in case. Evenings were spent by the fire, where they discovered a shared love of literature and lively debate. On the 4th day, as they were preparing breakfast, Alexander broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "The weather's clearing. We should be able to ride back to the stagecoach tomorrow, see what's left." Josephine nodded, feeling a strange reluctance at the thought of continuing her journey. "And then on to Laramie, I suppose. Unless you've changed your mind about becoming a schoolteacher," Alexander said, watching her carefully. "No, it's what I've trained for. It's why I came west." But even as she said the words, Josephine wondered if they were still true. In just a few days, this cabin had begun to feel like home in a way no place had since her parents died 2 years ago. Alexander cleared his throat. "Well, whatever you decide, my offer to escort you to Laramie stands." That afternoon, they rode out to check the cattle, and Alexander showed her a hidden valley where wildflowers carpeted the ground despite the late season. "It's beautiful," Josephine breathed, dismounting to walk among the flowers. "Emily loved this place," Alexander said quietly, watching Josephine with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "She called it her secret garden." The mention of his wife hung in the air between them, not as a barrier, but as an acknowledgement of the past that had shaped him. Josephine picked a small blue flower and tucked it behind her ear. "She had good taste," she said with a gentle smile. Alexander's eyes never left her face. "Yes, she did." That evening, as they sat by the fire reading Alexander from a volume of Whitman, Josephine from a dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre, a comfortable silence enveloped them. When Alexander finally closed his book, his expression was thoughtful. "Can I ask you something, Joe?" The nickname, spoken in his deep voice, sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Of course." "What are you running from?" The question caught her off guard. "What makes you think I'm running from anything?" A beautiful, educated woman traveling alone to become a schoolteacher in a frontier town. "There's usually a story there." Josephine closed her book, considering how much to reveal. "After my parents died, my uncle took me in. He had expectations about my future that didn't align with my own desires." "An unwanted suitor," Alexander guessed. "His business partner, a man 30 years my senior who viewed me as little more than a prize to be won." Josephine's voice hardened at the memory. "When I refused the match, my uncle made it clear I was no longer welcome in his home. So I answered an advertisement for a teaching position as far west as I could reasonably go." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Some men don't deserve the title." "No," she agreed, "they don't." Their eyes met across the small space, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps, or something deeper. The next morning dawned clear and bright. They rode back to the site of the ambush, where Josephine was relieved to find her trunk had been overlooked by the bandits, likely because it contained nothing of obvious value. Alexander secured it to Thunder's back, and they returned to the cabin by midday. "We can leave for Laramie tomorrow," Alexander said as they unpacked her belongings. "2 days' ride, maybe 3 if the weather turns." Josephine nodded, suddenly finding it hard to speak past the lump in her throat. The thought of saying goodbye to this man who had saved her life, who had shown her kindness and respect when she needed it most, filled her with a profound sadness. That evening, as they sat down to what would be their last dinner together, Alexander seemed unusually tense. He picked at his food, his gaze frequently drifting to Josephine before darting away when she caught him looking. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked. Alexander set down his fork with deliberate care. "I've been thinking about your situation." "Oh." Josephine's heart quickened despite her efforts to remain calm. "The teaching position in Laramie, is it something you're passionate about or just a means of escape?" The question took her by surprise. "I enjoy teaching," she said slowly. "But I suppose the location was chosen more for its distance from Boston than any particular calling." Alexander nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "The thing is, the school in the settlement near here lost their teacher last month, married a cattle baron and moved to Colorado." Josephine stared at him, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning correctly. "Are you suggesting?" "It's a small school, just 12 children from the surrounding homesteads. The pay wouldn't be much, but—" He paused, a vulnerability in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "You wouldn't have to leave." The word hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. "And where would I stay?" Josephine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander met her gaze directly now. "Here, with me, if you wanted." "As what exactly?" she pressed, needing to hear him say it. He stood and moved around the table to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "As my wife, Josephine, if you'll have me." Joy bloomed in her chest, so intense it was almost painful. "We've known each other less than a week, Alexander. And in that time I've come to care for you more than I thought possible after Emily." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Come to Laramie with me, meet with the school board there. If you still want that position, I'll wish you well and ride away." "But if not?" "If not," she prompted. "If not, we can visit the settlement on our way back. You can see the school, meet the families, and then decide." Josephine's mind whirled with possibilities. It was madness to consider marrying a man she'd known for such a short time. And yet, in those few days, Alexander had shown her more of his true character than most men revealed in years of courtship. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like to see this settlement of yours." The smile that broke across Alexander's face was like sunrise after the darkest night. He stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms, his embrace warm and solid and real. "I know it's too soon," he murmured against her hair. "I know I should court you properly with flowers and dances and Sunday walks after church, but something about you, Joe. It feels like I've been waiting for you without even knowing it." Josephine pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "I felt it too from that first day. I thought I was just grateful to be alive, but it's more than that." Alexander's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "May I kiss you, Josephine Taylor?" In answer, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as Alexander's arms tightened around her. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "Well," Josephine said, a smile playing at her lips, "I think that settles the question of chemistry." Alexander laughed, the sound rich and uninhibited. "Indeed it does, Miss Taylor." The next morning they set out for Laramie, but with a very different purpose than originally planned. As they rode through the settlement, a collection of sturdy buildings surrounding a small church, Josephine could easily picture herself teaching in the modest schoolhouse. The families welcomed her warmly, clearly desperate for a teacher for their children. By the end of the day, she had agreed to start at the beginning of the next month, giving her and Alexander time to prepare. "Are you sure about this?" Alexander asked as they rode back to their cabin that evening. "It's not too late to change your mind." Josephine leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I've never been more certain of anything." They were married 2 weeks later in the settlement's church, with the entire community in attendance. Josephine wore a simple blue dress that Alexander had ridden 3 days to purchase from a proper store in Cheyenne, insisting she deserved something special for the occasion. As winter settled over the Wyoming Territory, the cabin that had once felt so lonely to Alexander was transformed by Josephine's presence. She added curtains to the windows, flower arrangements on the table, and most importantly, laughter to the quiet evenings. Teaching proved to be as rewarding as she had hoped, and the children adored their new teacher who brought stories and songs from back east. Alexander expanded his cattle operation. Now that he had someone to come home to each night, there were challenges, of course. The winter was harsh, with blizzards that trapped them indoors for days at a time. Wolves threatened the herd, and once a group of drifters passed through, eyeing the prosperous little ranch with dangerous interest until Alexander made it clear they weren't welcome. Through it all, their bond deepened, tempered by adversity and strengthened by joy. When spring arrived, bringing new calves and fresh possibilities, Josephine discovered she was expecting their first child. "Are you happy, Joe?" Alexander asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. His hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach. Josephine covered his hand with her own. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." "No regrets about the teaching position in Laramie?" She turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same love that filled her heart to bursting. "Not one. This is where I belong." As twilight deepened into night, a sudden memory surfaced, that terrible moment after the ambush when she had thought her life was over before it had truly begun. "Alexander," she said softly, "do you remember what I said to you that first day when you found me behind the wagon?" He nodded, pulling her closer. "You whispered, 'Don't leave me here.' And what did you say?" His lips curved into a smile as he pressed them to her forehead. "I'll never leave you, Josephine, not then, not now, not ever." As stars appeared one by one in the vast Wyoming sky, Josephine Taylor Blackett rested in the arms of her cowboy, knowing with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how frightening their beginnings, led exactly where they were meant to. 5 years later, the Blackett Ranch had grown considerably. A new, larger cabin stood beside the original, which now served as Alexander's office. The cattle herd numbered over 100 head, and a small apple orchard was beginning to bear fruit. But the greatest blessings were the sounds of children's laughter that filled the once quiet homestead. 4-year-old Emily, named for the woman who had first shared Alexander's dreams, chased her 2-year-old brother William across the yard, their shrieks of delight carrying on the summer breeze. Josephine watched from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their third child grew stronger each day. Alexander rode in from checking the northern pastures, dismounting with the same fluid grace that had first caught Josephine's attention years ago. Time had added a few lines around his eyes and threads of silver at his temples, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. "Papa," Emily cried, abandoning her game to race toward her father. Alexander scooped her up, tossing her into the air before settling her on his shoulders. "How are my favorite ladies today?" he asked, climbing the steps to kiss Josephine. "We are well," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though your son seems determined to kick his way into the world before his time." Alexander placed a gentle hand on her stomach, his expression softening as he felt the baby move. "Strong like his mother, or stubborn like his father," Josephine teased. That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing Alexander had built as a gift for their 3rd anniversary. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, transforming the ordinary into something magical. "You remember what today is?" Alexander asked, his arm around her shoulders. Josephine smiled. "How could I forget? 5 years ago today, a handsome cowboy saved me from outlaws and changed my life forever." "I think we saved each other," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. And as darkness fell over the Wyoming plains, two hearts that had once been broken beat as one, stronger for having been mended by love that had come unexpectedly but would last forever.